Okay, so it is Friday night. We're waiting on Apparently, there's going to be some crazy shit coming up with all these. There's a lot of as far as I can tell, protests around the United States are scheduled in 19 different locations, 19 different cities, at least tentatively scheduled. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. It will probably be total chaos. Sup, bro, doggers. It's over 19. Abdullah tells me that it's actually over 19 now. So we got a shitload of cities. Some of them could be organic. Some of them could be. I mean, not could be. A lot of them are going to be set up through, veteran organizers. I mean, like people used to setting up protests and shit. And I wanted to talk about synthesis in its greater, like, not in a scientific way, or like in a political way, not like that. I wanted to talk about synthesis as it relates to who we are as people and what we perceive of the world, like the external world outside of ourselves. So you pretty much, the actuality of existence is that every single person that is made to be here under the normal, we would belong here, and that includes yourself and your enemies, or who you perceive as an enemy. You're all made, and you're here, and there's a reason for it, and it's always like that, and it's like that for any face-off between people throughout entire history. The thing that's going to be really challenging for people to understand is that you can't look at the situation with the Boog, the awakening. You can't look at the situation under the traditional datum, like a datum of like known points that you reference knowledge off of. You have to look at it in its instance, its particular instance, particular person, act. That's how you have to consider this stuff. If you don't come to that realization, it's going to cause you a lot of problems when the shit starts getting really crazy. Like right now, things are pretty even keel relatively to what it's going to be like, because right now you basically have the two synthesis, the synthesized party system where you have like a thesis and antithesis, and then you have like 30 wild cards, and then you have like organic people that may or may not buy into that synthesis to whatever degree they will or won't. That's a pretty simple situation. When this shit gets, like this is gonna culminate no matter which way no matter which way you're gonna fucking slice the Swiss cheese. No matter which way you slice the Swiss cheese, you're going to have situations arise where people are going to die in this thing, and it doesn't really matter what the scenario is. You could have the MSM narrative scenario, and it's already like you can clearly see that it's a high likelihood that this is going to escalate just with the controlled, status quo narrative of what the news media would say is going on in the world. Like it is not far-fetched to imagine how this is going to escalate into death for some people. You know what I mean? When that starts happening and you start to have the pressure of the loss of life, or if it's a different scenario than just that, where you're going to start having loss of life, you're going to have loss of resources, you're going to have drastic changes take place in the restructuring of economics and society within a compressed time frame. It's going to be extremely destabilizing, and it's going to make, like fear is a powerful motivator, but pain is the most powerful motivator. It's the most direct. But like there's different types of fear in and of itself. There's like abstract fear, where it's like you worry about something that you don't want to see, that hasn't come, but that your mind can detect it as a possible world, like as your brain attempts to navigate beyond the delta of time, like the moment and entropy, like you're imagining scenarios in your head. That's one type of fear. The other type of fear is the one that's observable, that is built from observable things that are going on. And it's really hard to explain this to anybody that hasn't been in a war, in a war, either as like a national there that's witnessed it, or as like up for or blue for, like one of the two sides fighting the war. It's a very strange and surreal feeling that feels like you're like moving out of the world, like your mind and your soul is like fucking separating from the world, because you can't really like put a finger on it. But when a person comes to a realization that there are groups of people who could have done anything in their life, like they could be, a corporation, they could work at like a tech firm, they could be farmers, they could be anything, but because of the circumstances, they're putting all of their effort and energy and mental power into figuring out how to fucking kill you. And they're out there doing it like in real time. And when you realize that there are human beings that are just as capable as you and that are highly motivated to come and like they're gonna use all of their energy, they're eating and sleeping for their purpose, which at that fucking kill you and put you into the ground as dust. And when you like have that realization, it is a spiritual catharsis, because it's not something that is like realized in its full sense unless you're going through the experience. Well, that's like, in one sense or another, that is what people are going to go through when the shit kicks off. And it motivates more than abstract fear, the actual real fear from things that you're seeing. It's a different flavor of fear, and it's way more highly motivating than abstract fear that we deal with now as a society in general, right? Like, of course, people have individual experiences, but attempt to solve all the time. Like we are constantly solving, whether it's a super problem. And that's the reason that people recognize patterns, and people recognize patterns in anything. And this is what is attributed to our need to, or our weakness to accept like brands in commoditization and in iconization and idolatry. Like when we reorient our life and existence towards like attaining a physical good or a product, and it's driven by an emotional sense of possible fulfillment by the product, because they harness in the branding imagery of the product, they encompass what you mistakenly identify for solving this constant hunger and drive that every single human being has in life, and we misattribute it to like a product, for example. But this is the same thing exists for teams, like the same phenomenon, the same mechanic, the same tendency of people will identify teams in everything, and they'll identify sometimes it's necessary, right? Like if there's a group of people coming to kill you and you want to survive, and they're all wearing one uniform, or they're all wearing one whatever, they have some kind of common thread, then it's advantageous in the selection process to identify like that is a common indicator, right? Like whatever it is, whether it be like if they're wearing a fucking armband or something, you're like, well, if I see somebody with an if you see people with armbands going around like genociding people, and then you see somebody with an armband in isolation, then it's probably safe to assume, it would be beneficial to you to assume that the single guy with the armband is with the same group. And the reason why is because it's a high risk. Like if you're wrong on that, the risk is really high. But if you're wrong on it, the risk is high. If you're right, there's low risk. Like it's just beneficial, right? So sometimes it works out. But what happens in social engineering is that this is like a known thing, that humanity seeks a constant like exponential simplification of taking things that they recognize and then stuffing them into boxes, like patterns, stuffing them into boxes with labels on them so that they can see the label and feel like they've contained it. But this isn't really the case. It's just practically the case, right? And when it's practically more advantageous to do that, it makes sense. But what happens in social engineering is that this is stuffing in the box and wearing the label that then makes in actualization whatever the fear was that people were trying to put into a box and put labels on, like an A team versus B team. It becomes actualized through both parties, both the like the predator and the prey. It becomes actualized, and they agree to put it in a box, and then that dictates future probability of things that are going to happen. And peace and war in and of themselves are a quantum state. Like, war is selected against peace and peace against war, vice versa, but it's on a continuum. And the I forget what they call it in like quantum mechanics, but you have influencers, you have like select choose and influence the probability of whether a condition achieves peace or a war state. Well, the selector for war is money. And that should be intuitive, because necessarily the war state is material, and it's provided for by money. And so that's like one of the huge qualities of money that needs to be understood. But the reality of the world is that, like a football game, people are just wearing uniforms, you know? But at the end of the game, they go home and they are human beings, and they were designed for a purpose that is not fucking football, you know? I mean, arguably, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some fucking football fans out there that are like would vehemently saying the thing about football, what you have to understand, the abstract quality of what I'm trying to say, is that, you know, as a spectator, when you're there and the numbers, and you see the refs and you see the seats and the bleachers and the spectators, and then you are engaged in a like physicality where you're all accepting that this is a football game. But what football really is, you know, in the concrete reality of what people go to watch football right now, contemporarily, I'm not talking about like the invention of the fucking sport, but I'm talking about what it is right now, is that football is a profit model. And that's what's really going on. And the profit model is selecting for what you're seeing on the field and how football changes over time, with like regulatory control and with equipment and uniform change and with staff position changes. All that is dictated by the pressure of money. And so what you're really looking at is a profit model. You're not actually watching a football game, you know, like if we really break it down. And it's the same thing with assuming and presuming the motives of people and the affiliation of people, especially when we try to put people in a box. And so this is like a critical understanding to have. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be careful of people or make yourself vulnerable. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that you should always be in defensive in that regard, like meaning that you don't have to be like aiming a barrel at everybody's face that you come in contact with. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you don't want to position yourself for like another person, you know, unnecessarily. This entire thing with China to coordinate, and that is why people can't wake up, because they are putting everything into a box with a label on it, and it is dictating the rules of the game and their options, and it is controlling their left and right limits for how they think about their own life and how it interfaces into society. And right now, if you went to college campuses and you asked people, you know, do you think socialism is inevitable? A majority of people are going to say, yeah, are going to say on the far right, we'll start with the left, they're going to say oil and it's not good. And then on the far right, you have fascism, and that's also dictatorial and not good. And where we want to be is like right in the middle, and that's the good spot. The real political spectrum is on the far left. You would have total government by whatever word you want to call it, whether it be Caesarism or Pharaohism or Nazism or communism. And then on the far right, it would be you standing out in the fucking woods. That is the political spectrum. And so sometimes when we're dealing with stress events like right now, where everything is building up in stress, we look at things, if we're lucky, we look at them as, how do I consider this situation that I'm trying to consider, and think of it outside the box. That is the wrong way to look at it. What you really need to do, if you want to be free, is to realize that there is no fucking box.